I watched my daughter-in-law Jessica from across the Christmas dinner table as she snatched the small box from my son Thomas' hands. The anticipation I had felt all evening suddenly turned to dread. This pocket watch had been in our family for 3 generations, a symbol of our resilience and values. When Jessica opened it, she laughed loudly. "This? Cheap junk," she declared, tossing it carelessly onto the hardwood floor. The room fell silent. Everyone stared at the watch as it skidded across the floor, its glass face cracking. I maintained my composure, smiling slightly, already formulating a plan. By tomorrow, Jessica would learn about value, respect, and consequences in ways money could never buy. My name is Archer Wilson. At 65 years old, I find myself in a position many fathers might envy. After 4 decades building a successful construction company from nothing but calloused hands and determination, I now live comfortably in the same Connecticut town where I was born. Not wealthy by national standards, but comfortable enough that I can focus on what truly matters: family and legacy. My son Thomas had always been my pride. Unlike me, he went to college, got his business degree, and brought fresh ideas to our family company. When he took over day-to-day operations 5 years ago, our profits increased by 30%. Thomas had always been intelligent but somewhat reserved, taking after his mother Susan, who passed away from cancer 8 years ago. When Thomas introduced me to Jessica Barnes 3 years ago, I had reservations but kept them to myself. She was stunningly beautiful, with the kind of polished appearance that comes from significant time and money investments. As a widower who had loved one woman his entire life, I found it difficult to understand the whirlwind romance. They married after only 6 months of dating. I wanted to welcome Jessica properly into our family. I gave them a down payment for their house as a wedding gift, added Thomas to the company ownership documents, and provided them with credit cards linked to my accounts for emergencies. I even bought Jessica a brand new BMW as a wedding present when she mentioned her old car was giving her trouble. Susan would have wanted me to be generous, to make sure our only child and his new wife had a solid foundation. For the first year, things seemed fine on the surface. Jessica would come to Sunday dinners, though she often checked her phone throughout the meal. She rarely helped with cleanup, always had a nail appointment or some other commitment that pulled her away early. Small things, easily overlooked when you want a relationship to work. By the second year, patterns emerged that worried me. Jessica had convinced Thomas to move from their modest first home to a much larger house in an exclusive neighborhood. The emergency credit cards showed charges at high-end clothing stores and spas. When I gently questioned Thomas, he seemed uncomfortable but assured me everything was fine. Jessica just had excellent taste, he said. She came from a different background. She was helping him build the right image for a successful business owner. The pocket watch that Jessica had just thrown onto my dining room floor was not particularly valuable in monetary terms. It wouldn't fetch much at a pawn shop. My father had carried it through the Great Depression, working 3 jobs and walking 5 miles each way to save trolley fare. The scratched brass case and weathered face told a story of perseverance through America's hardest times. When he gave it to me on my 21st birthday, he told me, "Time is the only true currency, son. Spend it on what matters." I had planned to tell Thomas the same words tonight. What Jessica didn't know, what I had only recently discovered myself, was the extent of her financial exploitation. As a man who built his business tracking every penny, I still maintained the habit of reviewing all accounts monthly. Last week, while Thomas was on a business trip to Chicago, I sat at my desk reviewing the credit card statements that had just arrived. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Jessica had been systematically maxing out each card, making minimum payments from our company accounts, and then continuing to spend. Designer clothes, jewelry, weekends at luxury spas with friends Thomas had never mentioned. In the past year alone, she had charged over $100,000 across 3 cards. The statements showed she had opened a 4th card I knew nothing about, listing Thomas as a cosigner with his business email address, so I wouldn't see the electronic statements. I sat there that night until dawn, poring over financial records, finding more and more evidence of Jessica's exploitation. There were charges for furniture I had never seen in their home, suggesting she was keeping a separate apartment or storage unit. Multiple large cash withdrawals. Even payments to a divorce attorney from 6 months ago, though that relationship obviously hadn't progressed. I had said nothing, gathering information, wondering if my son knew, wondering how to approach him without seeming like I was attacking his wife. Now, watching the pocket watch spin across my hardwood floors while Jessica smirked, I realized the problem went far deeper than money. This was about respect, values, and the very foundation of our family. The time for silence had ended. Christmas had always been sacred in our family. Susan had established traditions that I maintained religiously after her passing. The handmade ornaments we added to the tree each year. The reading of a Christmas carol on Christmas Eve. The dinner of prime rib, Yorkshire pudding, and her secret recipe apple pie that I had finally mastered after years of practice. This Christmas morning had dawned bright and cold, with fresh snow blanketing the yard. I woke early, filled with anticipation. Thomas and Jessica would arrive around 10, along with my brother Frank, his wife Elaine, and their 2 college-age children. My sister Margaret would come alone since her divorce last year. We would exchange gifts, enjoy appetizers and eggnog, play board games, and then sit down to dinner at 6. I spent the morning putting final touches on the decorations and preparing the food. At 9:30, I showered and dressed in my favorite holiday sweater, the one Susan had given me our last Christmas together. I placed all the carefully wrapped presents under the tree, taking special care with the small box containing the pocket watch. I had had it cleaned professionally and placed in a new display box, though I kept the original worn leather pouch tucked inside. Thomas arrived first, alone, explaining that Jessica was still getting ready and would drive separately. His strained smile suggested there had been an argument. I didn't pry. Soon, the house filled with the warm chaos of family, a welcome change from my quiet daily routine. Jessica finally arrived at 11:30, a full 90 minutes late. She swept in wearing a red designer dress that seemed more appropriate for a cocktail party than family Christmas, paired with stiletto heels and jewelry that caught the light with every movement. She carried several shopping bags with professionally wrapped gifts, each with coordinated ribbons and tags. I know. I'm fashionably late," she announced, air-kissing everyone. "The driveway is a mess, Archer. You really should hire someone to plow it properly." I didn't mention that I had spent an hour shoveling it myself at dawn, or that her lateness had delayed our gift exchange. The gift opening began with the usual mix of surprise delight and polite appreciation. I had taken special care with each person, choosing thoughtful items that reflected their interests and needs. For Frank, a first edition of his favorite mystery novel. For Margaret's new apartment, a handcrafted quilt from a local artisan. For my niece and nephew, contributions to their college funds along with small personalized items. For Jessica, I had chosen an expensive perfume I overheard her admiring at a family dinner months earlier. When she unwrapped it, she merely said, "Oh, thanks," and set it aside without opening the box. I noticed she seemed much more enthusiastic about the designer handbag Thomas gave her, squealing with delight and immediately transferring her belongings into it. As the afternoon progressed, small tensions mounted. Jessica complained about the eggnog being too heavy, the Christmas music being too old-fashioned, the board games being boring. She spent most of the time on her phone, occasionally showing Thomas something that made her laugh while ignoring everyone else. I keep my cool through it all. Susan had raised me with the firm belief that a host never loses his temper, regardless of the provocation. But with each dismissive comment, each rolling of eyes when someone spoke about family history, I felt a slow burn building inside me. Dinner began pleasantly enough. Everyone complimented the food, the table setting, the festive atmosphere. Jessica picked at her meal, claiming to be watching her figure despite having seconds of pie at Thanksgiving just a month earlier. The conversation flowed around various safe topics: world events, movies, my nephews, new job. After the main course, before dessert, Thomas cleared his throat. "I have something for Dad," he said, pulling a small package from his pocket. "It's not much, but we wanted to give it to him separately." I noticed the "we" despite Jessica clearly having no involvement, based on her surprised expression. Thomas handed me a new leather wallet, handcrafted, and of excellent quality. Inside was a photo of the 3 of us from last summer, along with a gift card to my favorite steakhouse. "Thanks, son." "This is perfect," I said sincerely. "And I have something special for you." I retrieved the small box from under the tree and handed it to Thomas. His eyes lit up with curiosity. As he carefully unwrapped it, I began explaining. This belonged to your grandfather. He carried it through the hardest times, and said it reminded him that even in dark moments, time moves forward and brings new opportunities. He gave it to me. When? Jessica interrupted by plucking the open box from Thomas' hands. What is this antique junk? She said with a laugh. Thomas, please tell me you weren't actually excited about this. It's not even a Rolex. Thomas' face fell. Jessica, that's a family heirloom. It's important to Dad. Jessica examined the watch with exaggerated scrutiny, dangling it by the chain. The gold plating is wearing off. The glass is scratched. She looked directly at me. If you're going to give gifts, at least make them something useful or valuable. This is just taking up space. Then, as everyone watched in horrified silence, she dropped the watch onto the hardwood floor. The sound of the glass face cracking echoed through the dining room. Oops, she said without a hint of remorse. Thomas jumped up, his face red with embarrassment. He knelt to retrieve the watch, cradling it like an injured bird. I'm so sorry, Dad. Well, get it fixed. Jessica rolled her eyes. Don't bother. Just get a new one. A real one. She turned to me. No offense, Archer, but Thomas is a successful businessman now. He needs to look the part, not carry around cheap junk from the Stone Age. The room remained deadly silent. I carefully controlled my expression. Decades of business negotiations serving me well. I simply nodded, took the watch gently from Thomas, and changed the subject by asking Margaret about her recent promotion. As we moved to dessert, the conversation remained stilted. Jessica, apparently bored with the tension she had created, returned to her phone. Thomas barely spoke, his face a mixture of shame and anger. When Jessica announced she had a headache and wanted to leave immediately after dessert, Thomas looked torn. You go ahead, I told him. Take her home. He'll pack up some leftovers for you to pick up tomorrow. As they prepared to leave, I overheard them in the foyer. Jessica was complaining loudly about wasting her Christmas with boring old people and their sentimental garbage. Thomas responded in a whisper I couldn't make out. Their voices escalated until Jessica snapped. Fine. Take their side again. See where that gets you, before storming out to her BMW. Thomas lingered, clearly wanting to say something to me. Instead, he just squeezed my shoulder before following his wife into the snowy night. After everyone else had left, and the house was clean, I sat alone examining the damaged watch. The glass was indeed cracked, and the fall had popped the back case open, revealing something I hadn't noticed before: a small folded paper tucked behind the mechanism. I carefully extracted it, unfolding a note in my father's handwriting. To my son, and his son after him, remember that true wealth isn't what you have, but what you build that lasts beyond you. Choose carefully those who share your journey. Time reveals character, always. I sat there in my empty house, my father's words resonating through decades. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake in the same bedroom I had shared with Susan for 38 years, staring at the ceiling and turning over the evening's events in my mind. The grandfather clock in the hallway, another family heirloom, ticked steadily, marking the passage of time as I wrestled with painful realizations. Thomas had always been a sensitive child. From his earliest years, he felt things deeply, preferring to retreat into books rather than confront conflict. Susan had been his confidant and champion, teaching him to stand up for himself in her gentle way. After her death, I watched him struggle, throwing himself into work rather than processing his grief. When Jessica appeared in his life, I recognized his attraction to her confidence and decisiveness, qualities Susan had provided for him, qualities I had perhaps failed to help him develop himself. I sat there in my empty house, my father's words resonating through decades. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. Thomas had always been a sensitive child. From his earliest years, he felt things deeply, preferring to retreat into books rather than confront conflict. Susan had been his confidant and champion, teaching him to stand up for himself in her gentle way. After her death, I watched him struggle, throwing himself into work rather than processing his grief. Around 2 in the morning, I got up and went to my home office. I opened my laptop and logged into the family accounts, poring once more over the evidence of Jessica's extravagance. The numbers were staggering. Beyond the credit cards, I found transfers from the joint account I had set up for them to another account in only her name. Small transfers, $2,000 or $3,000 at a time, that had accumulated to over $80,000 in the past 18 months. Had I enabled this situation? The question haunted me as midnight came and went. By providing financial support without accountability, had I created the conditions for Jessica to exploit Thomas and, by extension, me? My intentions had been good to give them a solid start, to make Susan proud. But good intentions paved many roads to ruin. As dawn approached, I found myself looking through old photo albums. Thomas, as a toddler on Susan's lap. Thomas at his high school graduation, tall and serious in his cap and gown. Thomas and me at the company's 20th anniversary party, his arm around my shoulders as we both beamed with pride. What had happened to that confident young man? I picked up my phone, hesitating before opening the text message thread with Thomas. Our recent exchanges had been increasingly formal and infrequent, limited to business matters or brief confirmations of family obligations. On an impulse, I texted him, "Are you happy, son?" I didn't expect a response at 5:30 in the morning, but my phone buzzed almost immediately. Define happy. What troubled me most wasn't the money itself. It earned enough in my lifetime to absorb the loss. What cut deeper was the calculated nature of it. This wasn't impulsive shopping or even lifestyle inflation. The systematic movement of funds, the hidden accounts, the timing of transfers, to fall just below automatic notification thresholds, these showed premeditation and deception. "Come by for coffee before work?" I texted back. "Can't today. Jay has plans. Maybe next week." I set my phone down, a heaviness settling in my chest. I had been losing my son gradually, so gradually I had barely noticed until now. With new resolve, I opened my email to check something I remembered seeing weeks ago, but hadn't fully processed. There it was, a notification about a login to Thomas' business email from an unrecognized device. As company founder, I still received security alerts, though I rarely paid attention to them anymore. Those two words told me everything. Thomas was awake at dawn on the day after Christmas, questioning the very concept of happiness. From Jessica to Thomas, dated 2 weeks ago. "Your father is undermining us again. He questioned me about the Chicago expenses when you were the one who told me to use that card. I can't keep living like this, with him checking everything we do. We need to move forward with the planning. My attorney says we can make the case for early inheritance based on your contribution to company growth. Just sign the papers." Thomas' reply, "I told you I won't go behind his back. This company is his life's work. I won't force him to sign anything over. Please stop pushing this." Following a hunch, I logged into the company email server as administrator. I rarely used this access, believing in respecting employees' privacy, even my son's. But something told me this was necessary. I located Thomas' account and saw dozens of emails from Jessica that had been automatically archived without being marked as read. Opening the most recent one, I found myself looking at a conversation that confirmed my worst fears. I continued reading through older emails, my stomach knotting. Jessica had been pressuring Thomas for months to demand an early transfer of company ownership. There were veiled threats about leaving, about him choosing between her and me. In one particularly chilling exchange, she had written, "Sometimes I think you love that company and your father more than you love me. If that's the case, just say so, and I'll find someone who puts me first." As I scrolled further back, I found something even more disturbing: text messages Jessica had sent, screenshotted and emailed to herself using Thomas' account, presumably while he was asleep or in the shower. Messages to her friends, mocking our family traditions, calling me a boring old man counting pennies, despite being loaded, describing Thomas as easily manipulated. The most recent thread with someone named Amber was the most alarming. Jessica's response, "Don't be naive. He's going to leave everything to you anyway. We're just speeding up the timeline. If you won't stand up to him, I will. And if you can't support me in this, maybe I need to rethink some things." Amber, "Oh my God, you'd actually move across country. What about Thomas' job?" Jessica, "He'll find something there or work remote. Main thing is getting away from his father's influence. T is actually a decent guy when he's not being daddy's little boy. Besides, CA beats CT in every way. Bye-bye snow, hello beach life. Amber. And if he won't move? Jessica. Almost got T to agree to ask for early inheritance. Once old man signs company over, we can look at places in California. Jessica. There's always divorce. CT has great alimony laws, and it'd get half the company value. Win-win. In that moment of clarity, I knew what I needed to do. This wasn't just about protecting my money, or even my company. This was about saving my son from years of manipulation and potential heartbreak. Sometimes, the kindest thing a parent can do is to allow natural consequences to occur sooner rather than later, before the damage becomes irreparable. I showered and dressed with purpose, selecting a business suit rather than my usual casual retirement attire. I had appointments to make and actions to take. By evening, Jessica would understand that actions have consequences, and Thomas would have a chance to see his wife for who she truly was. As I knotted my tie, a skill Susan had patiently taught me 60 years ago, I silently apologized to her for what I was about to do. Susan had always believed in giving people second chances, in looking for the good in everyone. But she had also been fiercely protective of Thomas. I had to believe she would understand that sometimes protection requires difficult decisions. I picked up the damaged pocket watch from my bedside table, running my thumb over the cracked face. My father had carried this through times when he couldn't afford to feed his family properly but never sold it. Understanding that some values transcend immediate needs, I tucked it into my pocket, drawing strength from its familiar weight against my chest. The path ahead would be painful for everyone involved. But as my father had written, time reveals character. It was time for revelations. I arrived at First National Bank just as they opened their doors at 9 o'clock sharp. Margaret Simmons, the branch manager, had known me for 20 years. She looked surprised to see me the day after Christmas, but welcomed me into her office immediately. "Good morning, Archer. This is unexpected. Is everything all right?" she asked, gesturing for me to take a seat. "I need to make some changes to my accounts, Margaret. Significant ones, and they need to happen today." For the next hour, Margaret helped me methodically restructure my financial arrangements. I closed the joint credit cards I had provided to Thomas and Jessica, transferring the outstanding balances to my personal account to ensure Thomas' credit wouldn't be affected. I removed Jessica as an authorized user on all accounts. I changed online banking passwords and security questions. For Thomas' accounts, I left everything untouched. He was an adult and earned his own salary, even if I had been supplementing it. Margaret raised an eyebrow but asked no personal questions. We've known each other long enough for her to sense this wasn't a decision made lightly. When we finished, she shook my hand firmly. "I'll ensure these changes take effect immediately," she said. "The credit cards will be deactivated within the hour." My next stop was Jefferson Luxury Motors, where I'd purchased Jessica's BMW. Frank Jefferson was a longtime friend and had handled all my vehicle purchases for decades. "Archer, what brings you in today? Something wrong with your truck?" He greeted me warmly. "The BMW I bought for my daughter-in-law. I need to address the ownership situation," I explained. Frank looked confused. "Isn't it still under warranty? Any issues we can handle under." I shook my head. "The car's fine, Frank, but I'd like to transfer ownership back to the dealership." Understanding dawned on his face. This was about family matters, not mechanics. Frank had gone through a messy divorce himself years ago. "Let me guess, repossession without looking like repossession?" he asked quietly. "Something like that." Frank nodded. "No further explanation needed." "Well, need to arrange for collection. Do you have the spare key?" I handed him the key ID kept in my safe. "I have no idea where she might be today, but she typically spends Tuesdays at Platinum Spa on Westfield Avenue. The car will likely be in the parking lot from around 10 to 2. Consider it handled, Archer." "Well, send our most discreet service team with the paperwork you already signed. The vehicle will officially be returned due to a financing review." He paused. "Do you want us to provide alternative transportation?" "Not necessary," I replied, knowing my answer might seem harsh. "She has options." From the dealership, I drove directly to my attorney's office. Despite the holiday week, Harold Green made himself available when I explained the urgency. Harold had handled my business and personal legal matters for 30 years. He was one of the few people who knew the true extent of my assets, which went well beyond the construction company. "You want to restructure your estate plan the day after Christmas?" Harold asked as I settled into the leather chair across from his desk. "Something happened with Thomas?" "Not Thomas. Jessica," I clarified. "I need to protect what I've built without hurting my son." For the next 2 hours, we reviewed my existing will and trust documents. I didn't want to disinherit Thomas by any means, but I needed to ensure Jessica couldn't pressure him into damaging financial decisions. We created additional trust structures with specific conditions for asset distribution. We added protections that would trigger in case of divorce. Harold suggested a family business succession plan, with clear timelines that couldn't be accelerated without unanimous board approval. "You've thought this through," Harold commented as we finalized the documents. "But, have you spoken to Thomas about any of this?" "Not yet," I admitted. "That's my next step, after one more errand." Harold gave me a concerned look. In my experience, sudden financial changes without communication rarely end well, even when they're necessary. "Tread carefully, Archer." I appreciated Harold's caution, but knew I had to act decisively. After leaving his office, I drove to Thomas and Jessica's house. They lived in Woodland Estates, an exclusive neighborhood with large homes on manicured lots. Their house was over 4,000 square feet, 5 bedrooms for just the two of them, with an enormous 3-car garage that housed Jessica's BMW, Thomas' more modest Audi, and apparently, according to the credit card statements, a recently purchased vintage Corvette ID, never seen. No cars were in the driveway, suggesting both were out as expected. I used my emergency key to enter. I had never used this key before, respecting their privacy, but today was different. I wasn't there to snoop, but to gather documentation I knew was in their home office. Documentation I had a right to as the financial provider. In Thomas' desk, I found the files I was looking for organized exactly as I had taught him. Bank statements, investment reports, household expense records. I took nothing but used my phone to photograph relevant pages, creating a clear financial timeline of Jessica's spending patterns. As I prepared to leave, something caught my eye on Jessica's desk, a legal document partially hidden under magazines. My conscience battled briefly with my concern, but I felt justified in looking closer given what I had discovered in the emails. It was indeed a preliminary filing for divorce, dated 3 months ago but never submitted. Next to it lay a document detailing Connecticut's marital property laws, with sections on business valuations highlighted in neon yellow. The final piece was a handwritten list in Jessica's elegant script. Phase 1. Get T to request early inheritance. Phase 2. Consolidate assets under joint ownership. Phase 3. California relocation or separation, depending on compliance. I photographed these documents as well, my hands steady, despite the anger building inside me. This wasn't just opportunism, it was a calculated campaign to extract wealth from my son and me. The coldness of it, the methodical planning, confirmed I was making the right choice in acting now. On my way out, I noticed family photos on the wall, Thomas and Jessica on their wedding day, the 3 of us at last year's company Christmas party. Jessica looked beautiful in every image, her smile dazzling, but now I could see something I had missed, before the smile never quite reached her eyes when she looked at Thomas. My final stop was my own company headquarters. Though semi-retired, I still maintained an office there and held the controlling interest in the business. I needed to ensure Jessica couldn't access company accounts or information systems, even through Thomas' credentials. Our IT director, Ryan, was surprised to see me but quickly understood the sensitivity of my request. We updated security protocols, changed access codes, and implemented 2-factor authentication for all financial functions. I took care to ensure Thomas' regular work activities wouldn't be affected, but placed new restrictions on any financial transactions over $10,000, requiring dual authorization from both Thomas and our CFO. When I finished, it was nearly 4 in the afternoon. I had been methodical and thorough. Every action was documented, justified, and implemented through proper channels. There would be no legal recourse for Jessica to undo what had set in motion. I returned home and settled in my study with a glass of scotch, the first alcohol I'd allowed myself all day. The house phone rang several times. I let it go to voicemail. My cell phone showed multiple missed calls and texts from both Thomas and Jessica, growing increasingly frantic as the day progressed. The most recent was from Jessica just minutes ago. "What have you done? My cards are declined. The BMW is gone, taken right from the spa parking lot. Call me immediately." I set the phone aside without responding. The confrontation was inevitable, but it would happen on my terms, not in a reactive phone call. I had one more task to complete before facing them. I went to my safe and retrieved the file I had compiled over the past weeks, adding today's photographs to complete the record. I created 3 identical folders containing every piece of evidence: credit card statements, bank transfers, email screenshots, divorce preparation documents, the asset targeting list. I labeled them clearly: one for Thomas, one for myself, and one for Harold to keep in safekeeping. As darkness fell outside, headlights swept across my driveway. Car doors slammed. Angry footsteps crunched through the snow toward my front door. The time for action had passed. The time for truth had arrived. The pounding on my front door echoed through the house like thunder before a storm. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and walked calmly to answer it. Before I could even turn the handle, Jessica burst in, her face contorted with rage. Thomas followed behind her, looking confused and distressed. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Jessica demanded, still wearing her spa robe under her winter coat, her hair wrapped in a towel. "Do you have any idea how humiliating it was to have my car taken away in front of everyone? To have my credit card declined for a $1,000 spa treatment I had already received?" I remained calm, gesturing toward the living room. "Let's sit down and discuss this rationally," I suggested. "Rationally?" Jessica nearly screamed the word. "There is nothing rational about what you've done." She turned to Thomas. "Did you know about this? Did you?" Thomas looked stunned, clearly caught between his wife and father. "I had no idea, Jess. Dad, what is going on?" I led them into the living room and took my usual armchair, indicating they should sit on the sofa across from me. Jessica remained standing, too agitated to sit. "Thomas, Jessica," I began, my voice measured and calm. "The events of last night forced me to reconsider our financial arrangements. The disrespect shown to a family heirloom was merely a symptom of a larger problem." "Are you kidding me?" Jessica interrupted. "This is about that stupid old watch? So you decided to financially ruin me over a piece of junk?" Thomas winced at her words. "Jessica, please calm down. I'm sure Dad has a reason." "Oh, don't you start defending him?" she snapped at Thomas. "This is typical controlling behavior. Your father can't stand that we're independent, that we're building our own life." I maintained my composure, though her mischaracterization tested my patience. "This isn't about control, Jessica. It's about responsibility and consequences. The BMW was a gift I chose to take back. The credit cards were in my name, linked to my accounts. I simply exercised my right to close accounts that I own." Jessica laughed bitterly. "Right. The day after Christmas. With no warning." She turned to Thomas again. "Are you going to sit there and let him treat us like children?" Thomas looked torn, his eyes moving between Jessica and me. "Dad, could you have handled this differently? Given us some notice at least?" I reached for the folder I'd prepared and placed it on the coffee table between us. "Before we discuss alternative approaches, I think we should address why this became necessary." Jessica eyed the folder suspiciously, but made no move to open it. Thomas leaned forward, his brow furrowed with concern. "What is this?" he asked. "Evidence," I replied simply. I opened the folder and began laying out documents one by one. The credit card statements showing hundreds of thousands in charges. Bank transfer records documenting the systematic movement of money to Jessica's private accounts. The emails and text messages revealing her plans to push for early inheritance and potential divorce. Thomas' face changed as he processed each new piece of information. Shock gave way to disbelief, then to a profound hurt that was painful to witness. Jessica initially tried to dismiss the evidence, claiming I was manipulating information and taking things out of context. But as the documentation mounted, her denials became less convincing. "These are private communications," she finally sputtered. You had no right to access them. Most came from company email servers and joint accounts that I legally own or control, I explained calmly. Nothing was obtained illegally. Thomas picked up the handwritten phases list, his hand trembling slightly. Is this your writing, Jess? He asked quietly. Jessica hesitated, clearly calculating her response. It was from months ago, before I really knew Archer. I was just protecting myself in case things didn't work out. Lots of women do that. She tried to take his hand, but Thomas pulled away. And these divorce papers? Thomas' voice cracked slightly. Dated 3 months ago while you were telling me you wanted to start trying for a baby? A flash of panic crossed Jessica's face before she regained her composure. Those were just a consultation. My friend Amber went through a horrible divorce, and it made me realize I should understand my rights. It's just being prepared, Thomas. I never intended to file them. Thomas turned to one of the email printouts. And telling Amber you might divorce me for a better win-win scenario if I wouldn't move to California? Was that just being prepared too? Jessica paled. You don't understand the context. Amber and I joke around. It doesn't mean anything. I sat quietly, letting Thomas process everything at his own pace. This had to be his realization, not my accusation. Jessica grew increasingly defensive, her explanations becoming more convoluted and contradictory. When Thomas pointed out the inconsistencies, she shifted tactics, turning to attack me. Even if I did these things, she said, gesturing at the documents, it's nothing compared to what your father just did. He humiliated me publicly. He stranded me at a spa. She began to cry, tears streaming perfectly down her cheeks without disturbing her makeup. How can you defend someone who would do that to your wife? Thomas sat silently for a long moment, looking at the floor. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, but steady. Dad didn't strand you. The spa is 3 blocks from our house, and you could have called me. You chose to take a taxi home instead. He looked up at Jessica, and I saw a new resolve in his eyes. What I can't understand is why you would do all this. We have a good life. I make a good salary. Was it not enough? Jessica scoffed, her tears vanishing instantly. Not enough? Thomas, we live in Connecticut. Your idea of success is a joke compared to what we could have. Your father is sitting on a gold mine, and you act like an employee grateful for scraps. I winced at her words, but Thomas' response surprised me. Those scraps built something real, he said, standing to face her directly. That company employs 38 families in this community, people who have worked with us for decades. It's not just about money. Jessica rolled her eyes. Spare me the small-town values speech. She grabbed her purse and coat. I'm going home. When you're ready to choose between your father and your marriage, you know where to find me. She stormed toward the door, then turned back for one final shot. And Archer? This little financial stunt? My father plays golf with 3 bank presidents and 2 state senators. Well, see how long your petty revenge lasts once I make some calls. The door slammed behind her, leaving Thomas and me in silence. He sank back onto the sofa, looking suddenly exhausted. Did you know? I asked gently. About any of this? Thomas rubbed his face with his hands. Parts of it. The spending was obvious. The pressure to get more from you, to move away that was constant. But the secret accounts? The divorce planning? He shook his head. I had no idea it went this far. Why didn't you say something about what you did know? Thomas looked up at me, his eyes reflecting guilt and shame. She threatened to leave whenever I pushed back, said I was choosing you over her. And I hesitated. I was afraid of being alone. After Mom died, I watched what that did to you. I didn't think I could handle it. My heart broke for my son. I moved to sit beside him on the sofa, placing my hand on his shoulder. Your mother and I had 42 years together, son. We built something real. When she died, I lost a piece of myself, yes. But I never regretted a single day with her. He looked at me, desperate for wisdom I wasn't sure I possessed. Love shouldn't feel like walking on eggshells. It shouldn't come with ultimatums. Thomas nodded slowly. I think I've known for a while. I just didn't want to admit it. He gestured at the scattered documents. Thank you for this. For forcing me to see what I was ignoring. We sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Thomas stood. I should go talk to her. Try to sort this out. I wanted to warn him, to protect him from more manipulation, but I recognized this was his journey now. I had done what I could by providing truth. The rest was up to him. Do what you feel is right, I told him. Just remember you're not alone, no matter what happens. After Thomas left, I carefully returned the documents to their folder. The confrontation had gone as well as could be expected, but I harbored no illusions about what would come next. Jessica would not surrender her plans easily. The real battle was just beginning. Late that night, my phone rang. It was Thomas. Dad? His voice sounded strange, caught between anger and relief. She kicked me out. Said I needed to choose between you and her. Where are you? I asked, already knowing what my next offer would be. Sitting in my car in the driveway. She won't let me in to get my things. The guest room is ready whenever you need it, son. There was a long pause before Thomas responded, his voice thick with emotion. Thanks, Dad. I think I'm going to take you up on that. After we hung up, I went to prepare the guest room, my emotions a complex mixture of sadness for my son's pain and relief that he was breaking free. As I put fresh sheets on the bed, I realized this was just the beginning of a long, difficult process. But for the first time in months, I felt hope for Thomas' future. Thomas moved into my guest room that night with nothing but the clothes on his back and a small gym bag he kept in his car. The next morning he called in to work, taking a rare personal day. I found him sitting at the kitchen table at 6:30, staring into a cup of coffee, as if it might contain answers to questions he hadn't yet formulated. Couldn't sleep? I asked, pouring my own cup. Not much, he admitted. I keep replaying everything in my head, wondering how I missed so many warning signs. I sat across from him, giving him space to process. We didn't talk much that morning, just existed in the same space, the way we had after Susan died. Around noon, Thomas announced he was going back to the house to collect some of his things. Jessica had texted that she would be out until evening. I offered to go with him, but he declined. I need to do this myself, he said. When he returned 3 hours later, his truck was loaded with boxes and suitcases. His expression was grim. She changed the locks, he told me, as we unloaded his belongings. Had to call a locksmith to get in, since my key didn't work. Cost me $300. Did you get everything you needed? I asked. Thomas shook his head. Just clothes, personal items, some photos. He hesitated. She already moved all the banking documents. The home office was cleared out completely. Over the next few days, a pattern emerged. Thomas went to work, trying to maintain normalcy there at least. I gave him space, but made sure meals were prepared, and we had time to talk in the evenings. Jessica alternated between icy silence and vitriolic text messages, the latter usually arriving late at night after she had been drinking. By Friday, less than a week after Christmas, the situation escalated. Thomas received a formal letter from an attorney representing Jessica, demanding immediate restoration of her former financial lifestyle, including reinstatement of all credit cards, return of the BMW, and a significant cash settlement to compensate for the emotional distress of her public humiliation. That's legally meaningless, I assured Thomas when he showed me the letter. Those were gifts I had every right to reclaim, not marital assets. Thomas nodded, but I could see the toll this was taking on him. That evening, he finally opened up fully about his marriage to Jessica. It started so differently, he told me as we sat in the living room. She was charming, attentive, made me feel like the most important person in her world. I was lonely after a string of failed relationships, and suddenly, here was this beautiful, confident woman who seemed to adore me. When did things change? I asked. Over the next few days, a pattern emerged. Thomas went to work, trying to maintain normalcy there at least. I gave him space, but made sure meals were prepared, and we had time to talk in the evenings. Jessica alternated between icy silence and vitriolic text messages, the latter usually arriving late at night after she had been drinking. Did you consider leaving earlier? Several times. But each time I came close, she would somehow sense it. She'd become the woman I fell in love with again for a few weeks. Attentive, loving, planning for our future together. He looked down at his hands. And then there were the threats. What kind of threats? Thomas hesitated. That she'd make sure I lost the company. That shed tell everyone I was abusive. That shed make my life a living hell. I convinced myself staying was easier than fighting. The pain in my son's voice broke my heart. I had raised him to be strong, but had never prepared him for this kind of manipulation. Before I could respond, Thomas' phone rang. He checked the screen and grimaced. "It's Jessica," he said, declining the call. "That's the 5th time today." Seconds later, my own phone rang. The screen showed a number I didn't recognize. Something told me to answer it. "Mr. Wilson?" An unfamiliar female voice asked. "This is Patricia Barnes, Jessica's mother." I was caught off guard. In 3 years, I had met Jessica's parents exactly twice at the wedding, and at one strained Thanksgiving dinner the first year. They lived in Florida, and, according to Jessica, rarely traveled. "Mrs. Barnes," I replied cautiously, "this is unexpected. Please, call me Patricia. I'm calling because—" Her voice faltered. "Because we think you and Thomas should know some things about Jessica, about her history." Thomas had noticed my expression and moved closer, his eyes questioning. I put the phone on speaker so he could hear. "What kind of history?" I asked. Patricia Barnes sighed heavily. "Jessica has done this before. The marriage, the financial manipulation, all of it. You're the 3rd family she's targeted." Thomas' face went pale. I reached out to steady him as Patricia continued. "The first was when she was just 22. A young doctor from a wealthy family. She was married to him for 14 months, before his parents realized what was happening and intervened. The second was a real estate developer in his 40s. That lasted almost 2 years. "Why are you telling us this now?" Thomas asked, his voice barely audible. There was a pause on the line. "Because my husband and I are finally facing our own role in this. We've enabled her behavior for years, making excuses, paying settlements to keep things quiet, helping her start over somewhere new when things fell apart. The pieces were falling into place. The perfect image of Jessica's successful, distant parents that she had cultivated. The lack of childhood photos in their home. The vague explanations about her past. "We're flying in tomorrow?" Patricia continued. "We'd like to meet with both of you, if you're willing. We have documentation you should see, and—" She hesitated again. "There's the matter of Jessica's younger sister." "Jessica doesn't have a sister," Thomas said automatically. "She told me she was an only child." "That's what she tells everyone," Patricia replied sadly. "But Allison exists, and she's been trying to warn Jessica's targets for years. Jessica has a restraining order preventing Allison from contacting her, or anyone connected to her, which is why you've never heard from her." After arranging to meet the Barnes family the next day, we hung up. Thomas sat in stunned silence, trying to process this new information that reframed his entire marriage. "How could I have been so blind?" he finally asked. "Manipulators are experts at targeting good people," I told him. "Your kindness wasn't weakness, son. It was just exploited by someone who knows exactly how to do that." The next day, we met Patricia and George Barnes at their hotel. They were not what I had expected based on Jessica's descriptions of cold, career-focused parents who never had time for her. Instead, I saw a worn-down couple in their 60s, carrying the weight of decades of worry and guilt. With them was Allison, Jessica's younger sister by 2 years. The family resemblance was striking, but where Jessica projected calculated perfection, Allison had a natural, understated presence. She greeted us with sad eyes that held no judgment. For the next 3 hours, the Barnes family shared their story. Jessica had been diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder in her late teens after a series of increasingly troubling incidents, manipulating friends, fabricating elaborate lies, and showing no remorse when caught. She had refused treatment, instead becoming more sophisticated in her methods. They shared police reports, medical evaluations, and letters from previous victims. "We tried everything," George explained, his voice heavy with decades of parental anguish. "The best therapists, interventions, even tough love. Nothing worked. She would just cut us off until she needed something, then reappear as if nothing had happened." The most valuable insight came from Allison, who had spent years trying to understand her sister. "Jessica doesn't experience love or connection the way most people do," she explained gently to Thomas. "For her, relationships are transactions. People are either useful or obstacles. It's not your fault you couldn't fix this. No one can. By the end of the meeting, Thomas looked both devastated and strangely relieved. The Barnes family apologized repeatedly for not finding a way to warn us sooner, explaining how Jessica had systematically cut them off from any access to her life. "We're staying in town for a few days," Patricia told us as we prepared to leave. "We've already spoken with Jessica once, but she refused to see us again. She's threatening to get a restraining order against us too." "What will you do?" I asked. George and Patricia exchanged weary looks. "The same thing we've always done," George said. "Stay available in case she ever truly wants help, and try to minimize the damage she causes in the meantime." As we drove home, Thomas was quiet, processing everything we'd learned. Finally, he spoke. "You know what the strangest part is?" he said. "I'm heartbroken, but not because I still love her. I'm mourning someone who never actually existed." I nodded, understanding completely. The Jessica he had fallen in love with had been a carefully crafted character, designed to appeal to exactly what Thomas needed. The real Jessica remained a stranger to all of us. The next week was a whirlwind of legal and practical matters. Thomas filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences rather than fraud or manipulation, a kindness Jessica hardly deserved. He arranged to have his remaining belongings packed and moved by a professional service while she was out. He changed his phone number after Jessica escalated to calling him 30 or 40 times a day. Throughout it all, he showed a strength and resolve I hadn't seen in years. Each day, he seemed to stand a little taller, speak a little more confidently, make decisions more independently. The son I had always known there was emerging from the shadow of manipulation. 3 weeks after Christmas, I found Thomas in his temporary bedroom, looking at the cracked pocket watch I'd placed on the dresser. "Do you think it can be fixed?" he asked when he noticed me in the doorway. "Probably," I replied. "The mechanism still works. It's just the glass and case that were damaged." Thomas picked it up carefully. "I'd like to get it repaired. Properly, by someone who understands its value." I smiled, recognizing the metaphor whether Thomas intended it or not. Some damage can be repaired if you entrust the work to the right hands, and if the foundation remains sound. "I think that's a fine idea, son." That night, as I lay in bed reflecting on the extraordinary events of the past month, I realized something important was missing from our approach. A way for Thomas to fully reclaim his sense of agency and control. He had been reacting to Jessica's actions, to my interventions, to his in-laws' revelations. It was time for him to act on his own behalf, to write the next chapter of his story himself. The question was how to help him see that without imposing yet another external direction on his life. The answer came to me as I drifted off to sleep. A memory of Susan telling a young Thomas that the best way to recover from a fall was to get back up and keep walking forward, eyes on the horizon rather than on the ground where head stumbled. Tomorrow, I would share that wisdom with our son once more, not as a directive, but as a gentle reminder of who he had always been. 3 months passed like a slow exhale after holding your breath too long. Winter gave way to spring, snow melting to reveal the first tentative crocuses in my garden. Thomas had settled into a new routine, still living in my guest room but spending weekends looking at apartments near the office. The divorce proceedings moved forward, complicated by Jessica's refusal to accept the prenuptial agreement she'd signed. But our attorney was confident about the outcome. Most importantly, Thomas was healing. He had joined a support group for survivors of narcissistic relationships, finding solidarity and understanding, among others. Wad experienced similar manipulation. Head started seeing a therapist to process the shame and self-doubt that had taken root during his marriage. And Head recommitted to the company with new ideas and energy, as if freed from an invisible weight. The pocket watch sat on his dresser in its new case. Head found a specialist in antique timepieces who had not only repaired the cracked glass, but had carefully restored the brass casing while preserving its character. It ran perfectly now, keeping precise time, as it had for 3 generations. On a mild Saturday in late March, Thomas and I were having coffee on the back deck, enjoying the morning sunshine, when he surprised me with a question. "Dad, do you ever think people can truly change?" I considered my answer carefully. I believe people can grow and learn from their mistakes. True change requires both insight and commitment. Why do you ask? 3 months passed like a slow exhale after holding your breath too long. Winter gave way to spring, snow melting to reveal the first tentative crocuses in my garden. Thomas had settled into a new routine, still living in my guest room but spending weekends looking at apartments near the office. The divorce proceedings moved forward, complicated by Jessica's refusal to accept the prenuptial agreement she'd signed. But our attorney was confident about the outcome. "Forgiveness is for your benefit, not hers," I told him. "It doesn't mean what happened was okay. It means you're not letting it control your future." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. There was something else on his mind, I could tell. Finally, he spoke again. Thomas stared into his coffee cup. "I've been thinking about forgiveness. Not reconciliation with Jessica," he clarified quickly, seeing my concerned expression. "But letting go of the anger I still carry. It's exhausting." This was unexpected news. The last we'd heard, Jessica had been living with a friend in town, still insisting everything was everyone else's fault. "What did she want?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. "To apologize," Thomas said, sounding as surprised, saying it as I was hearing it. "Apparently, she started intensive therapy. Her parents gave her an ultimatum: get help or be completely cut off, including the trust fund she'd been accessing for years without my knowledge." I raised an eyebrow, skeptical but willing to listen. "And you believe her?" Thomas shook his head. "I don't know what to believe anymore." She sounded different. Subdued. She said she doesn't expect forgiveness or another chance, just wanted me to know she's finally facing her issues. We sat in silence for a moment, the spring birds providing a gentle soundtrack to our thoughts. "You don't need to decide how you feel about it right away," I finally said. "Time will reveal whether it's genuine change or another manipulation." Thomas smiled slightly. "Time reveals character," he quoted. From Great-Grandpa's Note in the Watch. I nodded, pleased he remembered. How we respond to consequences says more about us than how we act when everything is going our way. Later that day, Thomas received a package by courier. Inside was a small box containing the diamond earrings had given Jessica for their first anniversary, along with a handwritten note. Thomas read it privately, then simply said, "She returned them because they reminded her of the person she doesn't want to be anymore." I don't know if that's progress or more drama, but at least I got the earrings back. The weeks continued to pass. Thomas found an apartment he liked and signed a lease, planning to move in May 1st. He started dating again casually, coffee meetings arranged through friends rather than the apps Jessica had always dismissed as beneath them. He seemed lighter, more himself than he had been in years. One evening in mid-April, Thomas asked if I would join him for dinner at Lorenzo's, the Italian restaurant where he had proposed to Jessica. I was surprised by his choice of venue, but agreed readily. When we arrived, I understood his purpose. This wasn't about revisiting painful memories, but reclaiming a place he had once enjoyed. Over plates of linguine and glasses of Chianti, Thomas shared his plans for the future. They were thoughtful, measured, reflecting both ambition and a new appreciation for balance in life. He talked about company expansion possibilities, about wanting to eventually have a family with the right partner, about a community development project he wanted our business to support. As he spoke, I saw Susan in his thoughtful gestures, in the way he considered how his decisions would affect others. I saw my father in his pragmatic approach to challenges, and I saw himself a blend of inherited strengths shaped by his own experiences, including the painful ones. "You seem good, son," I said when he paused. Centered, Thomas smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. "I am. Not perfect, not completely healed, but good." He took a sip of wine. "I learned something important from all this, Dad. About value." "What do you mean?" "That watch," he began. "When Jessica threw it on the floor, she saw something worthless because its monetary value was low. But its actual worth is immeasurable, because of what it represents: commitment, family history, perseverance, through hard times." He met my eyes. I was measuring my own worth all wrong too, through Jessica's eyes, through possessions and status. I forgot what you and Mom always taught me, that true value comes from character, from how you treat people, from what you build that outlasts you. I felt a surge of pride so strong it nearly brought tears to my eyes. My son had not only survived a painful lesson, but had extracted wisdom from it that would serve him for life. A month later, on a perfect May evening, we held a small gathering at my home to celebrate Thomas moving into his new apartment. Frank and Elaine were there, along with Margaret and a few close friends from the company. Thomas seemed relaxed and happy, proudly showing off the keys to his new place. As the party wound down, Thomas asked everyone to gather in the living room. He had an announcement to make. "First, I want to thank all of you for your support these past few months," he began. "I couldn't have gotten through it without you." He turned to me. "Especially you, Dad." Then, to my surprise, he pulled the pocket watch from his jacket and held it up. "This watch has become a symbol for me," he told the small gathering. "It survived the Great Depression with my great-grandfather. It kept time for my grandfather through 2 wars. It guided my father through building a business and raising me after we lost Mom." He looked at it thoughtfully. "And now it's helped me find my way back to myself after losing my way." Thomas carefully opened the watch case, showing how the restoration had preserved its character while repairing the damage. "Just like the watch, I may have a few more scratches now, but am still ticking," he said with a smile, "and am stronger for having been broken and repaired." As our guests applauded, I felt a sense of completion. The painful chapter that began at Christmas dinner had transformed into something valuable, a hard-won wisdom that 3 generations of pocket watch carriers would have recognized and respected. Later that night, after everyone had left and Thomas had gone to spend his first night in the new apartment, I sat alone in my study. The house felt emptier without him, but it was the natural emptiness of growth and forward movement, not the hollow ache of loss. I thought about Jessica, hoping sincerely that her attempts at change were genuine. Not for Thomas' sake she had lost her chance with my son, but for her own. No one deserves to spend a lifetime unable to form genuine connections, treating relationships as transactions rather than bonds of trust and affection. I thought about Susan, wishing she could have seen how her son had emerged from this trial stronger and wiser. She would have been proud of his resilience, his capacity for forgiveness, without forgetting the lessons learned. Most of all, I reflected on value and time, the 2 themes that had woven through this entire experience. My father was right. Time reveals character, showing us who people truly are beyond the masks they wear. And value isn't found in the price tag of a BMW or the brand name on a watch, but in the integrity with which we live our lives and the positive impact we have on others. I thought about Jessica, hoping sincerely that her attempts at change were genuine. Not for Thomas' sake she had lost her chance with my son, but for her own. No one deserves to spend a lifetime unable to form genuine connections, treating relationships as transactions rather than bonds of trust and affection. As I prepared for bed, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced since before the Christmas dinner disaster. Thomas would be all right. He had discovered his own value, independent of anyone else's assessment. And that was a gift worth far more than anything money could buy. What I realize now, looking back on that difficult winter, is that sometimes the most loving thing we can do for someone is to allow natural consequences to unfold, rather than shielding them from the truth. By taking back the luxuries Jessica had come to expect, I hadn't just protected my own resources. I had created the conditions for my son to see clearly what had been hidden in plain sight. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision that hurt in the short term, but ultimately led to growth and healing? Sometimes the hardest choices we make as parents, partners, or friends are the ones that allow people to face reality and find their true strength. If this story resonated with you, please consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear that setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's often the most loving thing we can do. And if you've experienced similar manipulation, or know someone who has, remember that time truly does reveal character, and healing is always possible after betrayal. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you in any way, please like, comment, subscribe, and share. Each story we share builds a bridge of understanding between our experiences, reminding us that none of us faces life's challenges alone. Until next time, may you recognize the true value in yourself and in those who truly love you.